Hello, class. It's Monday, March 30th, and we are going to continue with our online class today. And I'm hoping that right now you guys are taking a quiz on Canvas. I am going to double check and make sure that that's happening. I feel certain that it is. I gave you 20 minutes to take this quiz. Probably it'll take some of you only 2 or 3 minutes. I see a couple of emails. Oops. Oops. It looks like there's a problem with the quiz. It looks like there's a problem with the quiz. Hi, class. I have good news. I have good news and bad news. Good news. I forgot what the good news was. Good news, we get to discuss Nietzsche today. Oh no, good news is I got the live chat to work. Bad news, it looks like the quiz is defective. I will have to go to plan B. There's 3 folks online. That's great. Class, if you are here with me, let me know. Okay. Okay. Okay, I am planning on beginning to lecture on Nietzsche in about 5 or 10 minutes. Great. Okay, class, if you are on here with me, go ahead and let me know in the live chats. By the way, I'm not planning on taking attendance today. That's not what this is about. I just want to know if things are working. Yeah. Yes, okay. It looks like the quiz did not work successfully. I'm so sorry about that. I will have to go to plan B, and I'm going to start lecturing on Nietzsche in about 5 minutes, I think. Okay? There's now 6 people online on with me. I think that there's several people online, but I haven't heard from anyone on live chat. I'm going to begin to lecture on Nietzsche in about 4 or 5 minutes. Okay, good. Great. People are chiming in on live chat. Okay. Good. Good. Okay. Welcome, y'all. I'll tell you what, I'm going to give folks 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. Great to see everybody. Marissa, Angela, Justin, Brenda, Pope Master, that must be Jared. Yeah, good to see everybody. Welcome. I hope everyone's good. Let me just say while we wait a little bit for folks to get settled, that if y'all need anything, please let me know. I'm sure that a lot of people have said that to you. I feel like I've been a little bit flat-footed, sort of taking care of my students and holding your hand and being a blessing to y'all. I've been super busy with coronavirus stuff. But if you need anything, please let me know. And it's great to see everybody online. Welcome. I've now got 11 people. Yeah, y'all, the quiz was defective. I'm going to have to go to plan B on that. Very sorry about that. I will figure out how to give you a quiz before the end of the week, but I'm just going to trash that one. There's 12 people online now. If y'all need anything during this weird coronavirus time, please let me know. I tell you what, I'm going to start lecturing once we get up to 15 people. Yes, Michael Griswold, I agree that we'll figure out a way to do something like email your answers to me. I want to do it on Canvas, whatever we do, but I will figure something out, okay? Yeah, and I tell you what, hi, Christopher Womble, it's good to see everybody. I'm going to start talking about Nietzsche now. We've got about 15 people online. Brenda says she was able to take the quiz. What I was told by someone is that only the correct answers were showing up. So, yeah, that's not going to fly, unfortunately for you. We'll figure something out. And we'll have at least one more quiz for this semester, probably just one more. And we'll figure that out by the end of the week. And the quiz will be over Nietzsche. I hope that you watched the documentary. I hope that the documentary was helpful for you. Probably what I'll do is I'll create new questions, both on the basis of the documentary as well as what I'm talking about today in this lecture. Okay, y'all, I'm gonna go ahead. and talk about Nietzsche. And I'm going to go for at least an hour, but probably not more than an hour and 5 minutes. I think that I'll hang up and end the class at 5:15, which is an hour and 5 minutes. It's good to be with everybody. This is really weird doing it this way, but here we go. And I want to encourage y'all to use the chat feature. You can text me if for some reason that works better, but let's try to make this as interactive as we can. If someone has a question, please use the chat feature on YouTube. And here we go. So I'm tempted to talk a lot about what happened historically between Descartes and Nietzsche, but I think I'm not going to do that. If I were to do it, I would have to talk about Immanuel Kant, who really, in a lot of ways, is kind of like Descartes on steroids, I would say. We talked about how probably one of the top two most important things to remember about Descartes is his invention of the modern subject. Descartes defined the human person not as a rational animal like Aristotle did, but rather in terms of the thinking subject. For Descartes, you are not your body. For Descartes, you are just your mind. You are just your subjectivity. Your body is an object, which is no different from this Altoids can. That's the point of that metaphor, the ghost in the machine. Descartes views the human person, defines the human person kind of like a ghost in the machine. Your body's just a machine. It's just an object. It's not who you are. It's not essential to who you are. You are a thinking thing. You are a subject. And your body in that sense is disposable. And that's why in this class, I kind of frame Descartes along the lines of Plato. You will remember that Plato believed in this doctrine of transmigration of the soul, aka reincarnation. He believed that the human soul is that which remains from body to body to body. The human soul is that which perseveres and endures from life to life to life. People who believe in reincarnation imagine that in a previous life, you may have been a cow or a dog, and in the next life, who knows, you might be a human being again or some other kind of animal. But what remains is the true self. And Plato, at least at some point in his career, probably did believe something like that. And that's why for Plato, the true self is the soul and not the body. And I'm saying that is a lot like Descartes. Unlike Aristotle, who believed that the human person is an animal with language, a rational animal, an animal with logos. But Aristotle believes that the human person is this psychosomatic unity of body and soul. In other words, the human person is just like every other thing in the world. It is a combination of form and matter. In the case of the human being, the form is the what. Can y'all answer that? For Aristotle, the form of the human being is the what. The form is what, and the body is what. Can y'all answer that either by texting me or through live chat? I'll tell you, for Aristotle, the body is matter. Jared says mind. Marissa says soul. Yeah, that's right, Marissa. Soul is actually a better answer than mind for Aristotle. Remember, Descartes is the one who takes the soul in all of its complexity. Mind, heart, imagination, memory, will, conscience. There's all these different parts of the soul or faculties of the soul. Descartes says, I'm only going to focus on one of those elements, mind. So for Aristotle, the soul is a complex thing with lots of sub parts in it. Descartes comes along and says, nope, I'm going to define the soul exclusively in terms of mind. And that is why we said earlier in the class that in this way, Descartes can be regarded as a reductionist. So yes, Marissa's correct. Soul, Angela, good job. Emily Van Fleet, nice. Form is soul and body is matter. Man, y'all are better online than you are in person. No offense, but good job. Good. The body is the matter for Aristotle, and the soul is form. Again, for Aristotle, very briefly, everything in the world is a combination of form and matter. And so for example, an oak tree has the form of an oak tree, but it also has matter. That's true for everything that exists in the world, especially on that metaphysical spectrum between pure form, aka God, and pure matter, aka prime matter. Everything in the world that exists between those 2 points on the metaphysical or cosmological spectrum is a combination of form and matter. It's a hylomorphic combination of matter and form. That word hylo means matter, morphic means form. That's true for Aristotle. So that's true for the human person as well. The human person is a combination of form and matter, but the form in this case is called soul, and the matter in this case is called body. That's true for Aristotle, but guess who that's not true for? It's not true for Descartes. Descartes says, I don't care about the body. I don't think that the human body is essential to the human person. I'm going to define the human person exclusively in terms of soul, except he doesn't use the word soul. He uses the word mind, and that's because he's a reductionist in that sense. So if I were to talk about the historical developments intellectually that happened between Descartes and Nietzsche, one of the things that I would need to talk about is Immanuel Kant. And what I'm trying to say right now is that Immanuel Kant was a lot like Descartes, except on steroids. And what I mean by that is Immanuel Kant took this notion of the modern subject and developed it. He developed it very, very intricately and very, very thoroughly. But I'm not going to go into Kant. I'm not going to go into anything like that. I'm going to jump straight to Nietzsche, and I'm going to talk for 50 more minutes or so. And the first thing I want to say about Nietzsche is that he was born in Rücken in Germany. Nietzsche was German, and he was born in 1844. By the way, who can tell me, and I don't know what plan B for the quiz is, Jay-Z. I will figure that out soon. Richard Becerra, no problem that you're late. Sorry if folks couldn't find the link. Yeah, I will do better next class, okay? Let me ask y'all this. Nietzsche's dad was a what? Does anyone know that from the quiz? Oh, that was the correct answer, so you probably know it. Never mind. Nietzsche's dad was a Lutheran pastor, and that cannot be a coincidence. Emily says priest. Oh, no problem, Nathan. Thank you. By the way, y'all, in order to use the comments, that's true, you have to create an account, but it's not a YouTube account. It's only a Google account. And my assumption is that probably all of you already have a Google account. Anyway, I'm going to keep going. Nietzsche's dad was a Lutheran minister. If you don't know what the word Lutheran is, that's okay. It's a form of Protestantism. Martin Luther was probably the greatest and most influential reformer in the 16th century who broke with the Catholic Church and developed his own form of theology and church life. And it had a lot to do with privileging the Bible or scripture over the teachings of the church. And so that's Lutheranism. Luther himself was German. And so Lutheranism is very strong in most or many parts of Germany. And so, yeah, it makes sense that Nietzsche was born in a Lutheran family. And in fact, his father was a Lutheran minister. And the reason I think that that's important is because even though Nietzsche was an atheist, and that's connected to his famous statement, "God is dead," nevertheless, his writings are very profoundly theological. You could regard Nietzsche as a theologian. He just is an atheist theologian, and that is a thing that's possible. But what I'm trying to say is that it's significant that his dad was a Lutheran minister, because that probably formed him and shaped him in his religious and Christian and theological interests. Okay. Early interest and proficiency and aptitude for what you might call letters or the liberal arts, and that includes things like religion and philosophy and biblical studies. The documentary talks about that. He got high marks in primary school for biblical and theological studies, and he was interested in it. Only problem is that he experienced a tragedy early in his life. Does anyone know what tragedy he experienced? Can y'all tell me what tragedy Nietzsche experienced early in his life? I'm going to wait for a couple of seconds and enjoy my coffee. His father's death. Good job. Good job. Yay. Good job, y'all. Yeah, his father died. And, that's a traumatic experience for most people. And probably it was very traumatic for Nietzsche. And Emily Womack says that he was bullied. That's very interesting. And yes, that is definitely relevant. The point is, when you look at Nietzsche's life and pay attention to how he walks away from the Christian faith and rejects the Christian faith, it's easy to look at that tragedy that he experienced, that trauma, and say that that's probably connected to his decision to walk away from the church. There may be students in my class who have experienced tragic things in their life, maybe the death of a loved one, maybe some kind of other traumatic experience. Trauma is something that we've talked about quite a bit in this class already. And it may be that people in the class have experienced some kind of trauma, and it may be that caused you to doubt the faith that you were raised in, to say things like, if God is real, why would he allow me to suffer? If God is real, if God is good, if God is loving, if God is omnipowerful, omnipotent, then why is there suffering at all in the world? And that is probably connected to Nietzsche's story as well. Now, from a Christian perspective, I think that there are answers to that, but it's not my job in this class to go there. So Nietzsche's dad died. And then the next thing that I want to say is that his interest in literature and letters was not wasted, because what the career path, you might say, that he ended up taking as a young man is that he became a professor of what? Can someone tell me what Nietzsche was a professor of? I'll give you three choices. Philosophy, philology, or sociology. Anyone remember what Nietzsche was a professor of? Philosophy is not right. He wanted to be a professor of philosophy, but that didn't work out. He became a professor of philology. Very good, Michelle. Very good, very good. He became a professor of philology. And do you know what philology is? That's a big word. It's literally, philo means love, like philosophia, and logy means the study of. So a philologist is someone who studies words, especially words in languages like Greek and Hebrew and other very ancient, old, dead languages. And that's what Nietzsche was. He was a philologist, and in fact, he was a brilliant philologist. He was appointed as a tenured track professor at Basel, which is a city in Switzerland. You might know that in Switzerland they speak German, so Switzerland, it's easy for German and Swiss people to move back and forth between the two countries. And he became a professor at Basel as a super young man, and he was fast-tracked in that position because he was so brilliant. Emily asks, did he study language before he became a philosophy professor? And, I don't know a ton of details about Nietzsche. I don't consider myself a Nietzsche expert. However, Emily, what I would say is all people who study philosophy learn languages or study languages. At least that used to be true, and it's especially true outside of the United States. Nowadays in the US, things have changed, but back in the day, and especially in Europe, you could not be a professor of philosophy or theology unless you were super, super knowledgeable about languages like Greek and Hebrew. So the answer to your question is yes, he did study language and languages before he became a philosophy professor. And in fact, he never became a philosophy professor. He was only a professor of philology, although I would say he was a philosopher, but he was not a philosophy professor. He was a philology professor, okay? So, the next thing I want to talk about is Nietzsche's relationship with Wagner. And Martina, no problem that you're late. Bartina, no problem. It's probably my fault. And y'all, if you have any questions, please let me know. But I don't know if y'all have ever heard of Wagner. Wagner is a very, very famous composer, but he was more than just a composer. There's a sense in which Wagner, and by the way, it's spelled like Wagner, Wagner. Wagner was more than just a composer because he also wrote plays and dramas and operas, and he even he worked very hard with the German government to create kind of a Spielhaus, a Festspielhaus in German, which is kind of like a playhouse, like a theater where folks could come and enjoy his plays and his operas and his concerts. And that was in Bayreuth, in Germany. I'm going to spell Bayreuth for you, Bayreuth, Bayreuth, Bayreuth. And the reason I bring this up is because Wagner really, really was into art, and so was Nietzsche. But see, for them, you have to understand, for them, art was a super, super big deal. For them, art was political. Imagine if there were a political party that emerged in the United States. Imagine if there were a group of people that were like, the Republicans have no answers and the Democrats are just stupid. We're going to start a new party, but it's a political party dedicated to creativity and art. That's probably something that is very difficult for you or I to conceive of. But the reason for that is probably because you and I have a very low view of art. Now, you might not realize that you have a low view of art, but probably in your mind, art is not something that is important publicly. It's probably in your mind, art is not something that is super important in the same way that politics is important, or maybe the military is important, or maybe science is important. In our culture, we tend to think that like science, medicine, maybe business, maybe the military, maybe politics. These are things that are super, super important in our world. That's why even in the coronavirus time, if you look at the list of essential businesses, you're going to find financial institutions on that list. You're not going to find art houses on that list. Why? It's because in our culture, we do not regard art as super, super serious. But in Nietzsche and Wagner's culture, and especially for Nietzsche and Wagner in particular, they regarded art as super, super important. Art was worth dying for. Art was worth living for. And so when I say that Wagner was more than just a composer, what I mean is that for him, art was a whole way of life, and he really connected it to politics and wanted it to capture the imagination of the public in such a way that it would create sort of a revolution in German culture. You see, Wagner really thought that German culture was sort of pathetic. Maybe you've heard the word bourgeoisie, bourgeois. That's a word that typically is connected with Marx and Marxism. But Wagner and Nietzsche both regarded German culture as sort of descending or declining. They thought that the culture was decadent. They thought that basically people were dead and asleep, and they needed to be woken up, and they needed to have more passion in their lives, and they needed to have a great cause to give themselves to. And for Wagner, his vision was to use art and drama and operas and plays to capture people's imagination, to give people something to believe in, and to allow that art to bind people together in unity. Okay. And this very much influenced Nietzsche. And I want to connect Wagner's project, his project of using art to capture the imagination of people and to change the German culture. I want to connect that to Nietzsche's conception of Greek tragedy, okay? But before I do that, y'all, I skipped a point. I'm going to go back before Wagner and actually talk about Arthur Schopenhauer. We're going to come back to Wagner in a minute. I skipped Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer, I don't have his dates. I'm not going to say anything about his background. But Arthur Schopenhauer, oops, our fire alarm just went off. Okay, I'm going to pretend like that didn't happen. I'm going to spell Schopenhauer for you. It's Schoppenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer was a philosopher that Nietzsche came to love. And he was very influential on Schopenhauer, on Nietzsche. And I wanted to read you a paragraph. I'm going to read you a paragraph that talks about Schopenhauer. And the paragraph is this. In the penultimate section of The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche borrows an image from Heraclitus. Heraclitus, wow, one of the thinkers that we spent a lot of time talking about in this class. Nietzsche borrows an image from Heraclitus and describes the ultimate underlying reality of the world, the primordial unity of das Ureine. That means the primordial one. I'm going to call it that, the primordial one. This term itself is borrowed from Schopenhauer. Nietzsche described the primordial reality of the world in terms of, quote, a child playing on the beach, wantonly and haphazardly creating individual shapes and forms and then destroying them, close quote. At the foundation of his thought, both in The Birth of Tragedy and in another essay that Nietzsche wrote called Schopenhauer as Educator, at the foundation of his thought, that's how he describes metaphysical reality, is this primordial one. And that paragraph, oh yeah, no, I'm sorry, I need to read this. At the foundation of his thought, then, Nietzsche affirms a metaphysical vortex of chaotic forces which structure his thought, okay? So I want to read that again. What does Schopenhauer think is the bedrock nature of reality? Here's what he thinks it is: a vortex of chaotic forces. A vortex of chaotic forces. Now, y'all, that should sound like the blooming, buzzing confusion that we've talked about earlier in the class. That should remind you of Heraclitus, this notion that all is flux, that nothing is stable. Schopenhauer is very much a Heraclitean thinker. What he thinks is that at the bottom of reality is this thing called will. He also calls it das Ureine, the primordial one. But this will at the bottom of reality is just a brute force of chaotic drives, and it's scary. It's nihilistic. I think that Schopenhauer would say that this primordial one, this will, is, I think that he would say that it's not good or bad. However, what I want to say to you is that whenever you or I come to see reality as it is, whenever the conventions are stripped away and we can see reality as it really is, what Nietzsche and Schopenhauer would say is that that is a traumatic experience. It's as if you're looking into the abyss and suddenly you realize that nothing that you thought was real is real. You used to think that your boyfriend loved you. That's not real. You used to think that the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting. That's not real. You used to think that goodness and truth were real. Those things are not real. All of these things that you used to think are real are no longer real. And this is a traumatic experience. It's a traumatic experience when you realize that the world is a blooming, buzzing confusion, when you realize that the basis of reality is actually this will, this primordial one, which is just a vortex of chaotic forces, ideas, and ran with them, okay? So I want to emphasize this idea that for Schopenhauer, reality is tragic. And the reason why that's a big deal, we're going to come back to it soon, but if reality is traumatic, I may have said tragic, reality is traumatic. And if that's true, then what you and I have to do is come up with some sort of coping mechanism to deal with the trauma of reality. And for Nietzsche and Wagner, that's art. So Nietzsche, following Wagner, talked about the metaphysical therapy of art. So what is it that can provide human beings relief from the traumatic experience of glimpsing into the void? Art. We're going to come back to that when we talk about Nietzsche's views of Greek tragedy and when we discuss that article that you were supposed to read for today. And that we will continue to discuss that article called The Dionysiac Worldview. Okay? The point is that reality is traumatic, and therefore we have to find some coping mechanism. And the coping mechanism for Wagner and Nietzsche is art, but Nietzsche is also relying on Schopenhauer's thought. And what Schopenhauer said is that the coping mechanism for the traumatic experience of the primordial will, the best coping mechanism, he says, is Schein, which is a German word, Schein, which means appearance. Okay, and maybe you can see how the notion of appearance is closely related to the notion of art. Okay, we're going to talk about that as we get into the Nietzsche article. But what I want to say is that for all three of these thinkers, for Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and Wagner, the truth about reality is that it is traumatic, it's scary, it's so terrifying that no human being can possibly face it And if you were to try to look at it and stare it in the face, so to speak, you would be destroyed because it's that scary. It's like scarier than the worst horror film you've ever seen. And so we have to find coping mechanisms. And so all three of these thinkers, Schopenhauer, Wagner, and Nietzsche, say that we need coping mechanisms. Wagner and Nietzsche are explicit in saying that the most powerful kind of coping mechanism is art. And Nietzsche spoke of the metaphysical therapy of art. We have to cover up reality because it's so horrifying and traumatic, and we cover it up with art, okay? Now, that was Schopenhauer. I want to go back to Wagner now and say that Wagner's, I'm going to call it a political cultural program. His political cultural project or program of shaping and forming culture through his artistic productions like operas and plays, that whole project of Wagner's was very inspirational to Nietzsche. Nietzsche bought on to Wagner's project. He attended events at the Playhouse at Bayreuth. And he was a big fan of Wagner's. He was down with Wagner's agenda. But then, but what I want to say though is that for Nietzsche, he took Wagner's project of shaping culture through art, and he said, aha, that's what the ancient Greeks were doing with their productions of Greek tragedy. And I'm going to talk more about Greek tragedy later in this class and possibly next class, okay? But what I want to say to you is Wagner's understanding of his plays is very similar to Nietzsche's understanding of Greek tragedy. It's just that Wagner's plays were trying to form and shape culture and give people a reason to live and deal with the traumatic nature of reality in, I want to say, 5th century Athens, whereas Wagner's project was doing that same thing in 19th century Germany. And that's the difference, okay? And I'm going to talk more about tragedy soon. But Nietzsche does have a falling out with Wagner, and that does kind of shape the way he thinks, but also maybe not so much. This book that I'm holding in my hand is called The Birth of Tragedy and Other Writings, and these are Nietzsche's early works. And when Nietzsche wrote these texts, with one exception, he was very much under the sway of Wagner. And so that's true for the article that we are reading in this class, The Dionysiac Worldview, okay? Yeah, okay, y'all, now I'm going to talk for about 15 more minutes, and then I think I'm going to hang up at 5 o'clock. I want to talk about the way Nietzsche thinks of Greek tragedy. Now, what you need to understand is that when you think about Greek tragedy, don't think about a book of plays. You need to think about a production, actors, music, instruments, props, huge amphitheaters where thousands of people would come. And these Greek tragedies, and I think I want to say 5th century Athens, I think that's right. These Greek tragedies were super, super important. They were so important that, like, Greece would have a national holiday. Athens would have a public holiday in which no one had to work. The military was called off. The government was called off. Everything was called off, and there was this big festival. So I don't know if any of my students have ever been to ACL Fest in Austin, but imagine if all of Texas said, okay, for the first week in September, we're going to cancel all banking activity, all university activity, all business, and everyone has to go to Austin for the ACL Fest. And not only that, but if you're poor, we're going to pay for you to go. And by the way, if you don't go, that might even be a crime. That's how it was with Athenian or Attic tragedy. back in the time that Nietzsche is writing about. These plays, these tragedies were super important. They were a super big deal. When I was growing up, I lived in Washington, D.C., and we used to go to the National Mall and look at the fireworks on the 4th of July, and there were thousands of people out there. It was kind of like that. It was a huge festival that really captured people's imaginations. It was kind of like the highlight of people's year. And so what I'm trying to say is that it was super important, and it was important politically, it was important religiously. It was the thing that captured people's imaginations and bound them together. So what it meant to be a patriotic Athenian was to go to these plays and really get into them. Okay? Now, why is Nietzsche so attracted to these plays, to these Greek tragedies? And the answer has to do with these two primordial forces, or these two urges, or these two drives, which he calls the Dionysian and the Apollonian, okay? Now, obviously, these names are taken from the pantheon of Greek gods. Apollo, I kind of forget what he was associated with. I should call my 12-year-old. She knows more about Greek mythology than I do. I think he was associated with art, or maybe color, or brightness, or beauty. Dionysius, aka Bacchus. Bacchus is the Greek word for Dionysius, his Greek name. He was the god of, I think what Nietzsche says is that he was the god of intoxication. So Dionysius is the god of orgies and drunkenness and getting high and sex and unbridled pleasure. And what Nietzsche says in the article that we're going to begin discussing today, and we will continue discussing it next class, in the article, the Dionysian world, the Dionysiac worldview, what he says is that this Dionysian drive or urge, it originated in Asia. It's kind of interesting that the coronavirus originated in Asia. I'm not trying to be racist. I'm just pointing out a connection there. Nietzsche says that in Asia and in Asia, the Dionysian force or drive was very, very strong. You might imagine Asian cultures continually being given to orgies and drunkenness and lavish sex in these carnivals where roles are reversed, and suddenly the king is just as socially equal. He's socially equal with peasants, and all of the norms and conventions of society are thrown out the window. And for a period of 2 or 3, Nietzsche says that kind of thing was very prominent and common in Asia, and then eventually it made its way into Europe, into Greece. But the Greeks were geniuses, Nietzsche thinks, because they found a way to control this Dionysian urge. The idea here is that if you let the Dionysian urge run riot, it'll ruin your life. You won't be able to have a civilization. You won't be able to have a stable culture, a government, an economy, an education system. Everyone will just be drunk or hungover all the time. And so what Nietzsche says is that the genius of the Greeks is that they were able to find a way to harness or control this Dionysian urge. Now, remember how I was talking about Schopenhauer, and I was saying that for Schopenhauer, at the basis of metaphysical reality is this primordial one, this will that exerts itself in a force of chaos. That is closely connected with this Dionysian urge. that Nietzsche is talking about. And he says that the genius of the Greeks is that they were able to find a way to control or to harness this Dionysian urge. Now, notice, he doesn't say that the Greeks snuffed it out. He doesn't say that the Greeks rejected this Dionysian urge. Not at all. They loved it, and Nietzsche loves that they loved it. What they did is that they figured out a way to embrace the Dionysian drive of intoxication and orgies and sex and all of that. They found a way to harness that so that it didn't destroy them. That's what Nietzsche says is so great about the Greeks. By the way, it wasn't Aristotle and Plato that came up with this way of dealing with the Dionysian urge. No, it was the Greek tragedians, the playwrights like Aeschylus and Euripides and Aristophanes, Aeschylus, Euripides, and I'm forgetting one, Sophocles, I think. They were the ones who came up with this way to control and harness the Dionysian urge. And how did they do it? They did it by adding another principle and connecting that other principle with the Dionysian. They said, hey, we love getting drunk. We love intoxication. We love this idea of carnivals and orgies and sex. Yeah, we love all that. But if we're not careful, it will destroy us. It will consume us. It will wreck our civilization. And so what they did is they took this other drive, Nietzsche calls it the Apollonian, named after the Greek god Apollo, and they connect the Apollonian with the Dionysian so as to control it, so as to balance it out. I want to make two quick points about this real quick. First off, I hope you can see how that links up with what Schopenhauer said about shine, S-C-H-E-I-N. What Schopenhauer said is, das Ureine, this primordial one, this vortex of force is so traumatic that you have to find a way to deal with it. You have to find some kind of a coping mechanism. He called that shine or appearance. And I want you to see that that's what this Apollonian drive is. It is the world of art. It's the world of visual appearance. It's the world of image. It's the world of statues. It's the world of masks. In Greek tragedy, the actors would wear masks to portray their characters. All of that kind of visual representation is the Apollonian. And what I want you to see is that what Nietzsche is saying is that the Greek tragedians, they harnessed this Apollonian image dynamic and used it to control or harness or manage or deal with these Dionysian forces that are so powerful that they can destroy you. Okay, that's what's going on. The other point that I want to make real quick is that in this class we've talked a lot about dialectic. Dialectic is when you take two things and put them together. The two things might seem like opposites, like male and female, or Heraclitus and Parmenides, or mythos and scientia. But you can put these things in in dialectic and come up with a fruitful development. And that's what Nietzsche is recognizing in Greek tragedy. He's looking at the Greek tragedians and he's saying, here's why they're so awesome. They harnessed this Dionysian drive by introducing this other element called the Apollonian: images, visual arts, statues, props in a play. They took all of that stuff and they married it together with this Dionysian drive so as to be able to control it and to survive. Now, I need to say one other thing about the Dionysian before we move on. And by the way, I might almost be finished. Jared asked a question, I think. I'm going to make one more point, and then I think I'm going to open it up for questions, and then we'll see what happens. The last thing I want to say is that for Nietzsche, music has a very important role in all of this. In fact, this book says The Birth of Tragedy, but the actual title is The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music. I think that's right. The word music is in the original title. Music is super, super important for Nietzsche's point. In fact, music is super important for Nietzsche in general. That's also why he was so enamored with Wagner. But this music is associated with the Dionysian. Nietzsche thinks that there's something about music that is super, super powerful. It's intoxicating. Let me put it like this. I mentioned ACL Fest earlier. Maybe you've been to a concert. Maybe you've been to like a concert in Dallas or something like that, and you've had a religious experience at this concert. You go to this concert, it's by your favorite band. There's thousands of people there. Maybe you go with some friends and your favorite band steps out on the stage and they start performing your favorite song, and you're just swept up into this spirit of this performance. And it's a mystical experience. It's a religious experience. It's an experience in which you sort of get lost in the moment. That's very much how Nietzsche imagines the Dionysian. In the Dionysian, the distinctions between things goes away. So all of a sudden, when you get caught up into this moment, and if you think about things like Woodstock in the 1960s, where people were smoking pot when they would go to these concerts, that also heightens the point. Distinctions and divisions tend to go away, so that suddenly everything seems to become one. You feel a great sense of solidarity and belonging and connection to the people around you, possibly to the musicians themselves. Has anyone ever experienced something like that? Yeah, has anyone ever experienced something like that? Can someone give me an example of a concert that you've gone to whenever you were so caught up in the moment that you feel like you lost yourself, and suddenly you were one, you were connected with all of your surroundings, with the performers, with your friends, other people in the concert hall? Has anyone ever had an experience like that? I definitely have had that experience. Not many times. I would say I had it at a U2 concert once. I had it at a Killers concert once, like 15 years ago. And by the way, this is also why music is a very important part of the liturgy of the church. Historically and traditionally, music is part of Christian worship, and organs in particular are an instrument that Nietzsche very much would have associated with the Dionysian, I believe. Y'all, I'm going to talk for about 1 more minute, then I'm going to close the class. Let me just say, let me say, are there any questions? If there's any questions, go ahead and throw those out now. Let me just talk about the quiz. I'm going to redo the quiz. We'll figure something out. I will put it on Canvas. I'm going to have y'all take a quiz by the end of the week on Nietzsche. Likely that'll have something to do with email, but we'll figure it out, and that'll happen by the end of the week. Okay. So the quiz will cover the reading, the documentary that you were supposed to watch, as well as anything that I've said in this lecture right now. I have one question. How long does our essay have to be, and is it still due on Wednesday? Joe, I think that it's due on Wednesday. That assignment is up on Canvas. Let me see if I can find that real quick. Okay, I have to log back in. I'm looking for the due date for the mid-semester essay. The date has not been moved back for several weeks. The due date, I'm going to assignments. Midterm essay due April 1 at 11:59 p.m. So yes, Joe, that is due tomorrow at 11:59. Okay. And remember, the length requirement, the word requirement, is half of what it says on the syllabus. The syllabus says 2,250 words. I cut that in half, and it only needs to be 1,125 words. And yes, it's due at 11:59 tomorrow. Okay, so y'all, if you have questions about that, text me or email me. And I think that's it for today. I'm going to end the class a few minutes early. Sorry about the quiz. We will figure that out soon. I'll put that on Canvas. And yes, it is due on, yes, sorry, it is due on Wednesday. The quiz is due on Wednesday, March 1st, not tomorrow. Wednesday. Yes, Wednesday, March 1st. Sorry about that. Thank you all so much, Jay-Z and Angela. Wednesday, March 1st at 11:59 p.m. Sorry about that. Wednesday, April 1, 11:59. Okay? Thank you, guys. It's good to be with you today. If you have any questions or need anything at all, let me go. And that's it for now. Take care.